Hello, this is my first video. I am American Eagle. I was a Democrat for 27 years, and this video is about how I transitioned from being a Democrat to a constitutional libertarian. I am not a Republican. I was a Democrat for 27 years, 1986 until 2013. I graduated high school in 1986. I grew up in a Republican family. I grew up being taught conservative values and conservative principles. Love for the flag, love for the country. Two things that I adhere to and value to this day. I love America and I love the flag. I'm glad I was raised with that sense of reverence for this country and for the flag and the Constitution and the whole 9 yards. Okay, it's a good country. I grew up in a socialist town, a Democrat town. I would say 95% of my friends were left of center. I would say all of my teachers at all three levels of my education before I went to college, and actually through college also, all of my professors and all of my teachers in elementary school, middle school, and high school were left-wing. If I had right-wing teachers, they didn't let me know about it. Okay? So the combination of being raised in a Republican family and hanging out in a virtual exclusive socialist and leftist social setting, coming of age, I became a moderate Democrat. I used to see perpetual welfare and public assistance as compassionate. I believe the Democrat Party to be the party of civil rights, given the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I believe that the Republican Party only cared for rich people and was the party of racism, while the Democrat Party cared for the working people, poor people, and were the party of civil rights. As a Democrat, though, I never liked and I never appreciated the anti-American sentiment on the left and from many of my fellow Democrats. I would hear, like, America's a bad country because of this reason or that reason, and I disagree with that. America's not perfect, but it's a great country. It's the greatest country in history. I'll make another video about that. As a moderate Democrat, I always preferred capitalism over socialism, and I still do. I am a capitalist. I do believe in a socialist safety net, but capitalism is by far the strongest economic model to ever exist. It is the best economic model ever to exist. No other economic model can produce as much wealth with the capital as capitalism can. It's a very, very. It is the strongest economic model. It is the strongest economic model. Way better than socialism. All socialism is the counterattack of feudalism against capitalism. Capitalism emerged as a response to feudalism, and feudalism then after getting its butt kicked by capitalism, wrapped itself in the name of socialism and has launched a counterattack in the United States since the 1880s or so. The first time I was ever challenged about my democratic beliefs, liberal beliefs, was in August of 1992. I was living in Oakland, California at the time. And I had an African American friend who questioned me on my allegiance, loyalty, and enthusiasm for Governor Clinton, soon to be President Clinton. I was a huge Clinton fan. Growing up Democrat, I voted for Dukakis. I voted for Clinton twice. I voted for Kerry, and I voted for Obama twice. My African American friend Dale questioned me in August of 1992. Excuse me. And he asked why I loved the Democrats so much, and I said, well, they're the party for the poor, and they are the party for civil rights. And then it was at that time that Dale explained to me what the victim welfare state was, and how it was actually a continuation of a form of racism. Perpetual public assistance, which I, at that point, thought was a compassionate thing. But Dale spoke with me over the next couple weeks, and he told me about the history of the Democrat Party. Now, up until that point, I had always believed in the switch. Okay? And when Dale pointed this out to me, he showed me actually that the Democrats are primarily responsible for the three phases of racism. Now this is a black man, a black friend talking to me. God rest his soul. It took me 21 years for Dale's words of truth, coupled with other events, to compel me in walking away from the Democrat Party. There are 4 reasons why I walked away from the Democrat Party. Number 1 is the history of the Democratic Party's systemic racism in the U.S. And I'll explain that in a second. Number 2 is the corruption of the Obama administration. I'll explain that in a minute. The Democrat Party is evolving more and more and more to the left. Okay, they are moving away from liberalism. Okay, there's a difference between being liberal and being leftists. Liberals believe in big government. They tend to be democratic socialists, if not socialists. However, they believe in freedom. They believe in the Bill of Rights. They believe in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. They may disagree with you, but they will fight for your right to disagree. And skin color is completely irrelevant to liberals. That's not the case with the left. Okay? The left is fixated on skin color, and that is a result of the victim welfare state, which I'll get to in a minute. The fourth reason is the malleable nature of many Democrat friends of mine and many people on the left to media disinformation, coupled with the unwillingness to look at their own party's corruption. Now, there are 3 phases of systemic racism in U.S. history. The first is the slave state, 1776 to 1865. The second is the apartheid state, 1865 to 1972. The third phase of systemic racism is what I call the victim welfare state, 1965 to the present. Now, the slave state affected the entire country. The apartheid state affected the entire country. And so does the victim welfare state. I argue that the victim welfare state is perhaps as deadly as either of the previous two phases of systemic racism in U.S. history. It's really horrible what the victim welfare state has done. Okay, now there is this narrative advanced by the left and by the Democrats that there was this switch between parties. The absolute truth of historic racism, when you look at systemic racism in the United States, is that the Democrat Party is responsible for the slave state, keeping it going. They are responsible for what I call the apartheid state. I don't like Jim Crow or black codes. Get that out of here, man. It was apartheid. That's exactly what it was. Affected the whole country. And they are also primarily responsible for the victim welfare state. Now, what the victim welfare state is the manifestation of the first two phases of systemic racism into a political entity that operates under the guise of benevolence, but is actually the deliverer of oppression. Okay? The victim welfare state is in place to keep people divided in groups and believing that they are victims. Okay? That is what the victim welfare state does. If a person is taught that they are a victim, they become disempowered. And then they will seek the help of others, in this case, the former slave masters, for sustenance, for support, for the basic necessities of life. This is the sad reality of the victim welfare state. The victim welfare state has destroyed neighborhoods, it's destroyed families, it's destroyed school systems, it has filled the prisons, and it has created a whole nother level, in many ways worse than it was in the first two phases of racial animus, that needs to be defeated because it's a lie. People can walk away from the victim welfare state. They cannot, or they could not walk away from the slave state or apartheid state. Now, many people on the left argue that there was a switch. I and many Democrats claim that there was a switch. I used to believe in the switch. The switch being the Democrats went from the party of systemic racism to civil rights, and the Republicans went from the party of civil rights to systemic racism. This is not true. This is absolutely not true. Now, the Republicans absolutely are culpable with systemic racism because through the enforcement of the Chinese exclusion treaties, the nullification of several treaties of Native Americans during the late 19th century, the U.S. expansionism during the Spanish-American War. However, the Republicans are not the primary authors of systemic racism in the United States. Excuse me. As I said, the damage done by the victim welfare state is extensive. It's destroyed school systems. You have 7% of Baltimore school children being proficient in math and 22% being proficient in reading. Scores are similar throughout the entire country in the inner city, and this is done systemically. I believe it is, because that's what has happened. Now, the first cracks of loyalty, of my loyalty for the Democrat Party, happened in 2011 when Eric Holder was called to testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee on Fast and Furious. When I first heard about Fast and Furious, I thought it was a phony Republican scandal, as MSNBC and CNN told me, and I believed. I thought it was a phony Republican scandal in order to get at the Obama administration. I watched Eric Holder's testimony, and it was very clear that he was changing his story and refusing to answer questions. Now, if somebody's telling the truth, one doesn't refuse to answer questions, and one doesn't change their story. So I was wondering, how come he just didn't answer the question straight up? So a red flag went up, and Attorney General Holder was reprimanded for contempt of Congress, although nothing ever came of that. In addition to Fast and Furious, which I researched and found out to be true, which was the Obama administration sending heavy weapons to the cartels. There's the Cylinder scandal, the IRS targeting, Benghazi, I could make a whole nother video on that. Disparaging law enforcement as racist with broad prejudiced terms, actually. The arming of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Affordable Care Act. Now, I have read the Affordable Care Act. I know that sounds insane, but I've read it. It took me 14 months. The copy I had was 10,300 pages. I've heard there are bigger versions and smaller versions. I don't know. I got the one from the actual website, and I read it from 2013 to 2014. It took me 14 months. I read 20 to 30 pages a day. So I know what's in the Affordable Care Act, and it's a giant ripoff for the Federal Reserve and a couple healthcare corporations. And it's also designed to bring in a single-payer socialist healthcare system. So the history of the Democratic Party, coupled with the corruption of the Obama administration, is why I walked away. I could no longer deny the reality of the Democrat Party's history of systemic racism. The Democrat Party has never apologized for slavery or apartheid. They will never apologize for the victim welfare state. Okay? Now, they're offering reparations. You know what? In a way, I am for reparations. I believe those who are connected to organizations who had slaves should pay. Who is that? The Democrats. Pay up, Democrats. You are the slaveholders. You owe reparations. Okay? Don't ask Republicans to pay. It's your house. People can walk away from the victim welfare state, and this is the big difference between the victim welfare state and the previous two phases of systemic racism, the slave state and the apartheid state. The victim welfare state can only oppress those who believe its lies, okay? And one of the biggest lies is if you're a person of color, if you're part of the LGBT community, if you're a woman, that you're always a victim and you're never going to be able to shed or escape from that victimhood status. This is a lie. That is not true. That is not true. People of color are succeeding in America. Women are succeeding in America. Things aren't perfect, but every single person can have a great life if they work hard and use discipline. So I'm glad I walked away. The deep state is dominant in the Democrat Party today, and it has had influence in the Republican Party as well. You can't deny that. I am a supporter of the job President Trump is doing. However, I am a constitutional libertarian. I am not a Republican. See you next time.